After choosing empowerment over dread, I began searching for meaningful and effective solutions to put into practice in my own life. Progressive Hedonist is a podcast to share the ways we can take on climate change through food and joy. On days when this seems completely impossible, this podcast is a reminder that each of us can make an impact. I'm Dana Cowan. Join me in conversations with thought leaders like Alice Waters, Andrew Zimmern, Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, and more. We can learn together what is possible. You can listen anywhere podcasts can be found and join the conversation on Instagram at progressive_hedonist.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Welcome to Inside Julia's Kitchen, the podcast of the Julia Child Foundation for Gastronomy and the Culinary Arts. I'm your host, Todd Schulkin, the Foundation's Executive Director. Our show takes you inside the Foundation's world to meet the talented people we have the great fortune of learning from all the time. On today's show, we welcome back Smithsonian curator and author Paula Johnson. In this episode, we're going to talk to Paula about Julia Child's kitchen, her new book, All About It, and we'll hear Paula's second Julia moment. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. Wisconsin, the state of cheese, makes half of the nation's specialty cheese and wins more awards than any other state or country. Our heritage and traditions, master cheesemaker program, and the American propensity for innovation all put Wisconsin on the cutting edge of cheesemaking. With over 600 varieties of cheese to choose from and 5,500 national and international awards and counting, get ready to turn your refrigerator into a trophy case. Enjoying a Wisconsin cheese is basically like winning a gold medal in culinary achievement. Set your mind at cheese. When you bite into a wedge of Wisconsin Wonderful, you know it is made with the ultimate skill and passion possible. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
We're back with the next in our short series of special book-related episodes. And, as always, we launch the conversation with an inspiration from Julia. When you think of Julia, you likely conjure an image of her in a kitchen, whether it's on the set of The French Chef or in her home in Cambridge, Massachusetts. That tether is strong. So much so that fascination with Julia's kitchen has only grown over time. Not only was it a focal point in many scenes in the recent Max series Julia, but its design was also used as the fictional GBH set. The association with Julia's home kitchen is so strong that many mistakenly believe she filmed everything there. In fact, The French Chef was always shot on a set, and its sets changed several times over the life of the series, looking very different than Julia's home kitchen. However, like much Julia lore, it's often hard to convince people their memory might be a little off. Regardless, it's hard to think of a home kitchen that has captivated the public's imagination and affection more than Julia's. Someone who may now know more about Julia's kitchen than Julia herself is Paula Johnson. We first talked with Paula in 2018, way back in episode 3, when she told us the story of how the Smithsonian collected Julia's entire home kitchen in 2001. Paula is a curator and public historian at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. She conducts research and collects objects related to the history and culture of American food and wine, and serves as the director of the Smithsonian's Food History Project. Paula leads the team that created Food Transforming the American Table, an exhibition exploring major changes in food production, distribution, and consumption in the United States since the 1950s. This exhibition includes the installation of Julia's Kitchen as its gateway. Paula has shaped and contributed to numerous public programs on food history, including cooking demonstrations, wine history events, and the Smithsonian's Food History Weekend, which includes the presentation of the annual Julia Child Award at the Food History Gala. Paula received the Smithsonian Distinguished Scholar in the Humanities Award in 2020. She joins us today to talk about Julia and her new book, Julia Child's Kitchen: The Design, Tools, Stories, and Legacy of an Iconic Space. Welcome back to the podcast, Paula.
Thanks, Todd. It's great to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you about the book and the kitchen and all things Julia. So, what on earth is so special about this one kitchen you had to have it in the Smithsonian, and then now you wrote a book about putting it there?
Mhm. Well, as you know, the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History collects objects and documents that reflect a broad range of important topics and events and aspects of everyday life across the country, past and present. It's a big place. But Julia Child's home kitchen is a significant artifact. And in terms of food history, culinary education, women's history, and so much more. So when we learned in 2001 that she would be leaving her home in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to move back to her home state of California, we decided to contact Julia about her plans for the 40 years worth of tools and equipment that were in her kitchen. And I guess the rest is history. You know the story because we talked about it in episode 3, which has been a few years ago. But as you know, that story is epic and basically took the entire podcast. So I'll move along to the second half
Fast forward.
of your question, which was why write a book about this. And as for the book, the kitchen has been on view for much of the past 22 years. And we've had the opportunity to see how visitors engage with it and how they engage with the larger food history exhibition. At the same time, we've done a lot of work since then, since we collected the kitchen. And the book really gave me the opportunity to conduct more research. I mean, when you bring something into the museum, you know a lot about it. But you have it for 22 years, you learn so much more. And for me, it was really an opportunity to specifically go to the archives at the Schlesinger Library, where Julia's papers are housed, really, and to interview people who actually spent time with Julia in the kitchen, whether they were cooking or testing recipes, eating, conversing. So much of what we know about Julia relates to her time in France and the early television series. Those stories are so marvelous, The French Chef, etc. But the life of the kitchen is really 1961 to 2001, and that's not as well known. I really wanted to focus on those stories. And finally, caring for the objects in the kitchen has raised new questions about them. Julia told us a lot about various groups of kitchen tools and kitchen artwork, for example. But there were plenty of other stories to uncover over the past 2 decades.
We will spend some time extracting those. Before we get into some of the stories, you mentioned that. So there's a lot of stuff in that kitchen. Julia was not a minimalist. So how many items were collected? And tell us about some of your favorite objects.
The kitchen, had many, many elements to it. And there are over 1,000 individual pieces, including tools and equipment and artwork and furniture and appliances and architectural components and even systems like the kitchen sink and the garbage disposal. So, and my favorites keep changing, of course, but a few always make the list, including the 6-burner Garland gas range, which she bought used in Washington, D.C. in the 1950s and never wanted to replace. It was the range for her, and she adored it. The kitchen table and the chairs from Norway are so special. I do love all the things that she collected during their time in Europe in the 1950s before they settled in Cambridge in 1961. So, I look at the copper pots and the pans from Paris. that beautiful woven ceramic fruit bowl from Provence, the huge soapstone mortar and pestle from the Paris flea market. All of those things really resonate with me.
Yeah, I'm struck by with you picking, things that are not necessarily a knife or a wild gadget. That it's in many ways the kitchen is this tells a story of a life. All of these objects representing different phases or periods in her life and things that she kept.
hmm and I also love what I think of as the kitchen signposts, the Dymo labels that tell cooks where things belong and what not to put in the garbage disposal. Those things are these messages, so to speak, to cooks who were working with Julia and Paul in the kitchen. And everything had to be put back where it was supposed to be in order for things to keep going, to reduce chaos. And those little signposts in their own words are things that are very dear to me.
Well, that is a perfect segue to my follow-up question, which is the book is gorgeous, which was the plan from the beginning, but you never know. It is not just a very informative and comprehensive book, but it's beautiful. And the dino labels come into play, which I think you have to describe what those are because we now probably have two generations that may have never seen them before. And so tell us more about those and also kind of what the book is like if maybe for someone who's even been to the kitchen twice, like what does the book add? What can you see in the book that actually you can't easily see in person?
Mhm. Yeah, well, that is key. That is crucial because the book allows you to see what you can't see when you come to visit the kitchen. What's in all the cupboards? What's in all the drawers? What's behind all those blue and green, cupboards? And so um, the book kind of takes those objects out. And we worked with our fabulous Smithsonian photographer, Jacqueline Nash, who took these beautiful, beautiful photographs that are just sharp, so in focus. And you can look through this book page after page, and you can see what was behind the scenes in a way that you can't even see when you're standing there in front of the kitchen. So that's another wonderful feature of the book that I know everybody who's seen it loves it. Um, those are the kinds of things I think that really distinguish what this will be about. The You asked about, oh, what's a Dymo label? The label maker, the label maker. Those are little plastic colored strips that have white impressions on them, and so you write what the label is supposed to be, like artichoke, in the white lettering. And those things are spread around the kitchen and are fun to see.
But they also they're from a pre-digital period, right? It was like a kind of gun that embossed the letters on this little plastic strip that I'm
Yeah,
guessing was invented in the 50s, maybe?
yeah. I don't really know the history of the Dymo label maker, but people still have them to label some of their things. You're right, it's not digital. But Julia also had masking tape and magic marker labels. She also had little Polaroid snapshots that were stuck on the pegboard in the kitchen so that, again, people would know exactly where something was supposed to be hung or returned after use.
Yeah, I'm struck by this new fashion for Polaroids coming back that the is it Dino or Dyna label? How do you spell
Dymo,
Dymo?
Dymo. Yeah, Dymo label.
That they would come back because they have they're both like completely synthetic and almost have a almost combustible quality, but then they're extremely tactile compared to like a digital label, right?
Right, I guess it's funny you should, focus on that, but the way that it is used in the book is very creative. The designer has basically used the Dymo label look for some of the headings in the book. It's very clever, it's, gorgeous, and I think it, again, brings the story of the kitchen, the look of the kitchen, the philosophy of the kitchen, um, into the design in a really creative way.
Completely agree.
Mhm.
So you started to talk about this. I want to dive into it a little more. You mentioned that now the kitchen's been there for 22 years. There was a couple of periods where it was being um, renovated, restored in a certain way. You can give me the better word. The official museum term
Yeah,
for that,
the
which
museum. It was the
uh,
museum that was being renovated, not the kitchen. We have
oh,
not renovated anything in the kitchen. The kitchen is
exactly.
exactly, yeah.
How it was installed was being
Yes.
modified. So there were a few small periods where you couldn't see it, but for more than 20 years, it's been there. And I was just curious how you perceive is it more significant? Has that significance grown, or has its historical value since the Smithsonian originally collected it? Do you feel like that's changed, or it's just your view of it changed?
Yeah, that's complicated. Julia died 20 years ago, and the public interest in her kitchen has remained incredibly strong. We hear testimonials all the time about how important she was to individuals and families, and how her kitchen reinforces her messages about the values of cooking and learning about new ingredients in cuisines and cooking with others. It's just marvelous to hear from people who visit the museum again and again to see the kitchen, and to hear from professional chefs, young, medium, and old, about Julia's influence, and to see how visitors, even those who may not know exactly who Julia is, respond to this object, to this kitchen itself. And they pick up information about Julia from both our labeling and from the clips of her cooking shows that play in the gallery. So in my mind, it's hard for me to separate, you know, significance from this experience that visitors have, because that's a wonderful way of gauging significance, is how it is received by the public, and how people gravitate toward it, to take pictures with it, come back again and again. So in my mind, it is as significant, if not more.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm struck by that sort of reflecting, presumably when you collected it, you hoped this would be an outcome, but obviously you never know. And so some of what you're describing is you're still seeing the original goals
Mhm.
resonating and it being relevant.
Yeah, when we collected it, Todd, we did not really have permission to do an exhibit. So we were not even sure that we would be able to put the whole thing on display. But we had that faith that someday it would happen. We didn't think that we could possibly do it within a year, but we did. Opened it up in 2002 for the first showing. Again, it's something that, again, we just listen to visitors. And during that year, when we were processing the collection in front of the visitors, we would hear people talking about how much they wanted to see this, how they wanted to see the whole kitchen put together. And it was such a common theme that when we went to the administration of the museum, that said, look, this has got to go, the whole thing. And, and we found, we had this gallery, and boom, we were able to do it quickly. Um, because everybody was so motivated. Everybody wanted to get this kitchen up and to the public before or on Julia's 90th birthday. That was our big motivating goal. And to be able to accomplish that, and then to just stand back and watch what happens, and to see the response, is just a very powerful thing.
Okay, we're going to take our first break, and we'll be back with more from Smithsonian curator Paula Johnson. Stay with us.
Whether you're a chef or just love going to restaurants, you know the best ingredients are everything, especially when it comes to beef. In Northern Australia, there's a different approach to raising high-quality beef. Westholme, based in Queensland and Northern Territory, is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Westholme stewards 16 million acres of rangeland guided by their natural ecosystem. They're led by a belief that if they balance the needs of their cattle with the needs of the environment, both can thrive. Westhome's team of rangeland experts and nature managers use a variety of tools to monitor and respond to the welfare of the environment, like satellites that assess grass health and on-the-ground research. Cattle are happier when they have the freedom to forage and explore, so Westholme ensures that they can roam wild, foraging at will for the first 2 to 3 years of their lives. Their cows graze on native grasses like Mitchell grass, which is only found in Australia, along with dozens of other plants, herbs, and seasonal legumes. The result is a high-quality Wagyu beef that reflects the terroir of Northern Australia and a flavor suited to complement any cuisine. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westhome.com.
Welcome back. We're talking to Smithsonian curator and author Paula Johnson about her new book, Julia Child's Kitchen. So, Paul, at the top of the show, you kind of mentioned the kind of more sociological aspects rather than the design or physical object aspects, that the book really captures what's in her kitchen, but also stories about who cooked in it and how Julia used it and lived in it, both personally and professionally. And I thought there's too many in the book to cover in the show, but I thought maybe you could share a couple of stories or an anecdote in a story that are top of mind for you, just to give people a feel for what's explored.
Yeah, that's hard because I love stories almost as much as I love objects. And this was such a great opportunity to be able to interview people who were in that kitchen with Julia. And if there's one theme that connects all of those stories, it is fun. People talked about, yeah, we did all of this work in that kitchen. I can't remember anything we cooked. All I remember is that it was fun. And being in that space with Julia, and you can see it in some of the snapshots we have in the book, that people really are enjoying the labor, so to speak, the work. There's one wonderful photograph of Susie Davidson, who is, well, first of all, Julia Child was 6'3". Susie was probably a foot, 5'2", maybe.
No,
And
Susie is not short. She's like as tall as I am, but
is
she's
she?
shorter. Yeah, she's not short, but she's shorter than
Huh.
Julia for sure.
Yeah. Okay. I thought she was shorter because there's a photograph of her standing on the countertop to reach the top shelf of in one of the cupboards, and it's hilarious because Julia's taking a picture of her standing on the countertop, and again, that just to me signals that they're having a very good time in that kitchen, but you know, some of the other instances that people talked about, I had great stories from Julia's niece, Phyla, and grandnephew, Alex Prudhomme. And he recalled a dinner party in the kitchen that involved chefs and Harvard intellectuals and, neighborhood purveyors. I think it was a fish, and included a woman that Julia had met at the gas station that very morning. And just invited her, "Oh, come, I'm having dinner." And so, they were all around the table, and this is one of those things that Julia much preferred. Julia and Paul much preferred having a dinner party around the kitchen table than going into the fancy, beautiful dining room. So she had this group of people around the kitchen table, and it just it really, I think, conveyed her sense of that Julia was fundamentally a social creature who really wanted to bring people together around the table, literally, and to mix things up a bit. People also talk about being invited to dinner and being worried about, oh gosh, what is she going to cook? Am I going to be exposed as a rube if I don't know how to use the right fork, or. And then they get there and it's in the kitchen, first of all, and she will hand them a tool and, a oyster shucking knife and, say, well, 2 dozen oysters over there, that's your job. And, they would have to, get involved in the actual preparation of the meal because, again, for Julia, cooking was such a social activity that she wanted everybody involved and invested in bringing this meal to fruition and enjoying it together. One of my favorite stories, I'll be brief, is producer Jeff Drummond, who had met Julia at an event at Boston University one evening, and she invited him to come over the following day so that they could discuss ideas for another television series. This was in the early 1990s. And so when he arrived at the appointed hour, she buzzed him into the house, and he went up the few stairs, entered the kitchen. She was not there. No one was there. But he heard her voice from on high, from the second story, telling him that she would be down in a few minutes. And why didn't he just go ahead and start breakfast for them? And so here he was. He had never been in this kitchen before. And Julia Child is asking him to start breakfast so they could eat together. And so, well, what do? The kitchen is laid out, so intuitively. He got pots and pans together and, got the ingredients together and was, halfway through cooking breakfast when she came down. And, she was delighted to see him and to help finish breakfast that they could enjoy together. And again, to me, that's just this wonderful it's a reflection of Julia. We know she was generous and marvelous and hilarious on television. Well, apparently in her kitchen, she was the same way.
I'm wondering there, though, was that actually kind of a test of Jeff? Like, if I'm going to work with you, you have to be the kind of person that can roll up their sleeves and be comfortable in my
hmm
kitchen.
Well, it could have been. I'm not sure he thought of it that way, but that's an interpretation that could be explored. Yeah.
Well, and I was going to say it might not even been conscious on her part.
Uh-huh.
Like, it's not like she sat around being like, I'm going to test Jeff.
Right.
It's just
Yeah.
what occurred to her. But
Yeah.
obviously, if she'd come down and he'd been sitting there primly and said, oh, I didn't want to touch anything,
Right. That would
that
have been a deal breaker. Yeah.
I think so. It would certainly have made an impression that might have changed the course of history.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love those ones that you've chosen. I was in what you were talking about. I thought of this quote that comes up often. Not that Julia would say. In fact, Sarah Moulton says it a lot in her stories, and I think you talked to her. Is Julia used to always say, "Aren't we having so much fun?" But it was usually in the midst of some kind of chaotic thing where everybody
Yeah.
was working on something. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. She said that. Yes. Yeah.
But I feel like that's like as much as people Julia did not put mottos up in their kitchen. Like if Julia had a signboard of her, musing, it would have said, "Aren't we having so much fun?"
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, we can't skip talking about cats because we know how popular cats are,
hmm
especially in social media. And there they were in Julia's kitchen. Can you just give us a primer on cats in Julia's
Yes.
kitchen?
Yes. The cats. Julia adored cats. She had cats. She loved them. And there's cat art all over the kitchen. My favorite, and I think the favorite of most people who have been there, is Three Cats with the Asparagus behind them. Cats and Asparagus by Rosie Manel. There's also a cat cutout figure, a ginger cat that was sitting on top of the refrigerator, very visible anywhere in the kitchen. And that was given to Julia by Dory Greenspan and much beloved. There are refrigerator magnets that are cats. There are little cartoon cats, a Klebon cartoon. There are little glass cats on top of the refrigerator. And then there are two photographs that we found in the material that Julia donated in 2001 that just I adore. And they're two photographs that Paul took of their cats, their real cats. One who is reclining on the open door of the dishwasher you can see the dishes are in there, and it must be the door was opened after a cycle and it's nice and warm. And so we know that cats gravitate toward warmth. So this cat is sprawled on the door of the refrigerator or the dishwasher. And the other is a little cat peeking out from inside a stock pot on a shelf in the Garland range. And these are two things that anybody who knows cats, will totally appreciate.
And I would say, fear not, dear listeners, because I asked Paula this because I know there is a section on cats and all of what she talks about, very well documented and beautifully so in the book. So if that is striking your fancy, it is all there. So let's go back. In episode 3, I asked you the question about how the kitchen can feel like a spiritual experience. And I'm always slightly embarrassed when I describe this to someone because it sounds very woo-woo or silly, but unless, of course, you're actually there, and then it doesn't.
Mhm.
So do you still feel like this quote unquote spiritual experience is still the general vibe that museum visitors get from it? Or is it just because the lighting's dim to preserve it from decaying?
Well, I think that it's still true, especially for people who knew Julia or who are, hardcore FOJs, fans of Julia. They come with their emotional attachment to her. You cannot underestimate that emotion and that attachment. And it's magnified by seeing her space and her things. And for many people who saw the television series filmed in the 1990s in that kitchen, it feels like you've been there before. And it
Mm.
feels so immediate. And so it is emotional. Um, for others, I think it may not be spiritual in the same way, but I think it's still engaging and very evocative. It's a very cool room, and there are lots of places to look and study and respond to. I mean, people stand there for a long time, and sometimes when I'm down in the gallery, I have to, decide, am I gonna interrupt this person or not? And I usually do because I could say, uh, you know,
You're a researcher by nature,
yeah,
right?
it's like, "Can I help you find something in the kitchen?" And then, usually they will ask a question, and then I can tell them that and 10 more things, which usually is lovely. But people really want to see how she organized things, what she had, and to study them a little bit. And again, the book will help you because you can see things up close and personal. For example, then I'm going off your question here.
No, that you're actually answering exactly my follow-up question is, what does the book add to the spiritual experience?
Yeah, well, the knives, for example, is that you can look at the knives on these, magnetic strips on both sides of the sink, and you can sort of see them. You see the shapes, but boy, you get this book, and they are photographed individually and arranged in the same way, and you can really sort of see. You could see just the marks on the knives. You can see the dings on the handles. You can see all of this stuff that just makes you appreciate again the level of activity, the serious work that was done in that kitchen, and what worked for her as a cook and cooking teacher. That's what she always called herself in the kitchen. I think a lot of people also respond to that central table. It's so inviting to think of this table right in the middle of the kitchen, which very few people have anymore. But they have this desire to just sit there.
Mhm.
I'd love to be sitting there having a cup of tea.
Mm.
And that's just again a testimony that reflects, I think, a depth of emotion, but also the way that this object evokes memory and evokes things that you bring with you to the museum about your own relationship with food, your own family, your own spaces. Yeah, so it's a complicated, spiritual, engaging, evocative experience for people.
And I think just to add to, the book that was a labor of love and passion for you and is just beautifully, beautifully done, both in terms of how you tell the stories and all of this work you did with Jackie on the photographs that are you feel like spending time with it. And I feel like it's a book that when people get it, they might read the whole thing, they might read a chapter, but that it's the kind of book you will go back to time and again. And unlike the exhibit, usually when someone's visiting, they have a set amount of time they can possibly spend there. But with the book, you really can revisit as much as you'd like.
Absolutely.
So I mentioned the kitchen is the gateway to a larger exhibition on food, and I wanted to take the opportunity for you to tell us more about, food history at the museum and what's currently going on that visitors can experience, because it's quite multifaceted.
Well, the Food History Project at the National Museum of American History, the museum is a huge museum. There's so much to see. But the Food History Gallery is on the first floor, very accessible. And if you walk into the gallery, the exhibition is called Food Transforming the American Table. And you'll come across stories and objects, some of which are familiar and others perhaps less so. But it's organized around the big changes in how and what we eat and drink in the United States. And this is changes since the 1950s. Someday it'd be lovely to have a much larger presentation about food in history, food and culture and history. And, this gallery, it can sort of support 50 years. And we're, bulging at the seams. But, this time period is great because you can bet that someone in every group that comes through will have personal experience with something in this show. And that is one of those things where, especially if you have a multi-generational group, like a family coming through, it's just wonderful to see how, the questions that are asked about some of the early convenience foods and just how exciting it was for people who are now, grandparents, great-grandparents, and how, it's just so ordinary to the younger generation. But in the exhibition, there are stories about, the rise of industrialized and centralized food production, the rise of convenience, fast food and snack foods, and then the subsequent impacts on health and labor and the environment. I mean, those are, some of the consequences of the industrialized food system. But there are also objects and stories representing the opposite ideas of back to the land, of slow food, of community and school gardens, and really the ways in which immigration and migration have expanded our ideas about food and about community and identity. There are big sections on the rise of American wine and winemaking, as well as home and craft brewing. And these sort of add to the narratives of major changes as well, because they were also about kind of rejecting the centralized, commodified food or beer and wine. That this was, again, looking at a different way of thinking about food production and the experience of consumption. It's important to note that exhibitions can't do everything. And for many years, the Food History Project has created public programs that involve cooking and conversations. And these programs are free and open to all, have brought many chefs and cooks to our kitchen stage, people who can demonstrate a recipe from their region or a particular culture, or from a particular event in history, and to do so in an interactive way with the public. We just completed our 10th annual Food History Weekend, and among the public programs offered were a demonstration of chicken lo mein, for example, made in a wok by cookbook author and Chinatown activist Grace Young. So in addition to taking us through the paces of how you do wok cooking and, why and what it means and how you too can master this wonderful cooking technique, she also sat down for a conversation with Yafen Yu, who is our Asian Pacific American Center director. And they talked about how Grace's work in supporting mom and pop businesses in Chinatowns across the country has, really grown since the pandemic and the days of anti-Asian hate incidents throughout the country, and how those communities are becoming more empowered, but need to have support to stay economic viable. So, things like that where, it is about the food, it is about the recipes and history, but it's also about today and what matters and what relates to those food traditions that, using the past to understand issues in the present is just a powerful tool, and food is a great way of making those conversations possible.
Yeah, having just attended Food History Weekend a couple weeks ago and having people like Julia Child Award recipient Grace Young and Julia Child Award recipient Tony Tipton Martin, among several others, it was kind of a celebration of the 10th anniversary of the award. So most of the guests at the demonstrations were past recipients, but it really brings to light, just as you said, history as it relates to the present. And that is a wonderful thing about food history. All right, we're going to take a second break. And when we come back, we'll hear Paula's second Julia moment. Let us know what you think of today's show. Send us an email or a voice memo to contact@juliachildfoundation.org. We'll be right back.
When you flip anything, you just have to have the courage of your convictions, particularly if it's sort of a loose mass like this. Well, that didn't go very well. See, when I flipped it, I didn't have the courage to do it the way I should have. But you can always pick it up, and if you're alone in the kitchen, who is going to see?
From Julia's immortal words, we move into our last segment, which we call the Julia moment. Here's when we ask our guests to share their favorite Julia memory, moment, or how she's inspired them in their career. Okay, Paula, what's your, for the official record, second Julia moment?
Okay, well, there are many, but this one is visible in the book. And so I'm mentioning it here. In the book, on the almost last page, there's a photo of me with Julia from 2002. And we are looking at each other and not at the camera. This shot illustrates what Dory Greenspan had told me about Julia, that when she was speaking with you, she was really paying attention to just you and not looking around the room. And we've all been in social places, social occasions where people are just eyeing everybody else, even though you're standing in front of them. Julia was the real deal and cared about you when you were sitting there. So I had stood in line like everybody else at this event. I had my chance to speak with her, and it was the opening of our first exhibition of the kitchen in 2002. And I was sitting there, and I could not look away. I heard the photographer kind of, making I don't know, it was just, you're aware that the photographer is there. And I just could not look away. I remember she was remarking on how we had collected the kitchen and, I don't know, saying something about that. And I just could not, I was not about to miss any part of it, to smile for the camera. And, our eyes were on each other for this, I don't even know how long, probably just a moment. But it has really stayed with me because, again, it solidified what I had learned about Julia and what I continue to believe about Julia is that she was a intensely social but also genuine person. And being in the seat next to her, looking at her was you know, just the deal.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I remember you saying very, very specifically, I want that picture in the book. And by maybe photography standard, it's not the ideal pose shot of you and Julia where you can see all your faces. But thank you for giving us that background on why that photo was so important to be. I think it's the only one, or almost the only one, of you and Julia in the book.
It's the only one of me. And, and it's great because you can't see my face. But again,
No. If you
but
want to
no,
see
no, no.
Paula's face, she's on juliachildaward.com in the video about the award.
But to me, it was just perfect because, yes, I'm the author of this book, but, it is a love letter to Julia and it's a love letter to the Smithsonian. And I just feel that, just me looking at Julia is about the way I should be represented visually. So anyway.
It is absolutely a love letter to all of those things, and now a love letter to be shared with everyone else. So thank you for doing it and writing it and joining us today, Paula.
You're very welcome, Todd. Thank you. This has been fun.
Indeed. As Julia would say, aren't we all having fun?
Yes.
And thanks everyone for listening. Hope you had fun too. For more about food history at the Smithsonian, it's at AM History on Instagram. Or you can use the search engine and type in food history plus the National Museum of American History, and that should take you to a link to the food history page with all the programming and latest information. The book is Julia Child's Kitchen, the design, tools, stories, and legacy of an iconic space by Paula J. Johnson with new photography by Jacqueline Nash. It's out now from Abrams. Ask or search for it at your favorite bookseller. Proceeds from the book benefit both the Julia Child Foundation and the Smithsonian. Save the date for the next Santa Barbara Culinary Experience, May 12 to 18, 2025. Follow at SB Culinary Experience on Instagram for the latest news and updates, and go to sbce.events to join the mailing list. In fact, if you sign up right now, you have the chance to win a copy of Paula's book, Julia Child's Kitchen. Inside Julia's Kitchen on juliachildfoundation.org, heritageradionetwork.org, or whenever you get your podcast. Please follow at Julia Child on Facebook and at Julia Child Foundation on Instagram and Threads. For our latest news, I'm at T. Schulkin on Instagram and Threads. The Julia Child audio clip from The French Chef is used with permission from our friends at GBH. Thanks to my co-producer at the Foundation, Lauren Salkeld, and our sound engineer is Gabe Jean. Our theme song is New Friend Horn by Novi Valtorni. We look forward to bringing you back into the Foundation's world next time on Inside Julia's Kitchen.